Thank you for listening to the Shanghai Community Fellowship Podcast. To find out more about the SCF community, listen to sermons, and upcoming events, visit us at shanghaifellowship.org. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and again, welcome to Shanghai Community Fellowship. Delighted to have you on this Sunday afternoon. Today, we're going to be starting a new series from the biblical book called 1 Samuel. Now, you're probably wondering if there's a 1 Samuel. Yes, there is a 2 Samuel. Actually, at one point, that was just the book of Samuel, and it got so long, and they had to write on 2 different scrolls, and that became a 1 and a 2. But I encourage you to read it, and we're going to be looking at particularly the life of the man for whom the book is named after, Samuel. And if you want to read the chapters about Samuel, you can start with chapter 1. That's where we're going to begin today. And I think it's about the first 10 chapters, mostly about him. And then he appears a few more times. And then by the time you get to chapter 25, you read about his death. So, like I said, we'll be looking at Samuel, who, of course, the book is named after. But also there are 2 other main individuals that are introduced in this letter this book of the Bible in the Old Testament. There's Samuel, and there's also King Saul, and there's also King David. And we'll be looking at a little bit the other 2 guys, Saul and David, but mostly Samuel and the way Samuel's life touches these other 2 men, Saul and David. Now, you might think in a biographical series like this, we are going to be focusing on Samuel. And why wouldn't you think that? I mean, after all, that's the series about Samuel. But I want to make a slight observation as we begin, because we're not really, we are going to be looking at the life of Samuel in this series, but what we're really going to be doing is focusing more on the way God relates to Samuel. So we'll look at Samuel, but we're going to look at Samuel in a way that gives us an insight and understanding in the way that God relates to Samuel. And then Samuel, how he relates to later Saul and David. Because what we want for ourselves is the takeaway where we learn more about how God relates to us. Here in the 21st century, here in 2025 in Shanghai, China, what we really want to know is, how does God want to relate to us? And he's given us these short scraps of info from the life of Samuel, that we might not only see Samuel, but we also might see God and see the way he chooses to relate to Samuel. That's where we're going, and we're going to start today. However, today we're starting this series by looking at Samuel's mom, or as my friends from Great Britain say, his mum. We're going to look at Samuel's mom, and we're going to take a look at Hannah, because you really can't separate the person of Samuel from his mother and his father, whose name is Elkanah. So let's begin by telling the story that you can read about in chapter 1. There's a couple named Elkanah and Hannah. Hannah is the wife, of course, of Elkanah, but there is also another wife, Peninnah. And Peninnah is probably the second wife. And what we learn right away as we read the story is that Hannah is unable to bear children. And in a different time, in a different culture, being able to bear children as the wife of a man was absolutely critical and essential to the wife's role. I know it's hard to understand today in a modern audience, in a 21st century audience, but you put yourself in another culture and another time, that's how it was. In all likelihood, Elkanah probably married a second time so that he could have children with Peninnah, his second wife. Now, it's a very faithful, Yahweh-loving family, and they actually stand out because this is a time when there are very few Yahweh-loving families. You've got Elkanah, you've got Peninnah, and you've got Hannah. And every year they would go to the city or the town of Shiloh, and these guys lived in Ramah, and they'd travel about 16 miles to the city of Shiloh, where there was a temple, a tabernacle, and the Ark of the Covenant was there. And there was a priest there named Eli. And they would go every year for a festival where they would eat, and they would celebrate, and they would make prayers, and they would worship at the temple. And it was just a great time, a beautiful time. It was a fun time, except for Hannah. Because that annual festival was one of those times, one of those annual things that happen in our lives that tend to remind us of something that we don't have, or tend to remind us of how we wish something was different. Here we are again. It's Christmas again. It's Chinese New Year again. A year has passed, and my life hasn't changed. This thing that I long for, this thing that I hope would be different, a whole year later, and it's still the same. This phenomenon is just a human thing, and it's no different for Hannah. They go to the festival every year, a joyful celebration, except Hannah is not spending time at the table of goodness and wonderful things to eat and drink and try. Hannah is actually at the temple, and she's praying. Actually, the way it describes her, she's just crying out to God in distress and brokenheartedness. Just another year, another no-child year. And she's just praying, she's crying out to God, and she's asking God for help and just pouring her heart in many, many, many tears. And as she's praying, Elkanah notices that she is not happy. He's as a husband, and this part maybe he's sensitive enough to realize that she is brokenhearted, although how could he have missed the tears, right? Or that she's not at the party, she's at the temple praying. And so this somewhat sensitive husband becomes somewhat less sensitive when he says to her, "Oh, Hannah, why are you so resentful? I know you don't have children, we don't have children, but am I not good enough? Am I not as good as 10 sons?" And of course the answer was no. No. You're not Elkanah as good as 10 sons. Not the same. Well, she stays there and she continues to pray in this way, and Eli, the priest, overhears her. Now, just a little insight into Eli, because what he says to her next is, as he sees her praying in the temple, her lips are moving, but there's no sound coming out. He thinks she's drunk. And of course, if you're the priest at the temple in the city where there's great feasting and drinking every year, this isn't probably an unusual situation where people come with a little too much to drink into the temple. And he thinks that this is Hannah's story. But she immediately responds to say, I've not been drinking too much. I'm praying and pouring out her heart to God. And Eli says something to her. He says to her, she said, "I'm not drunk, but I'm troubled in my spirit. I'm pouring out my heart to God." He says, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." Now, we don't read in the text what Hannah's response was, but we see what Hannah does. Because just a moment ago, before he spoke this word to her, "God has heard your prayer," she's crying and weeping, maybe even uncontrollably so. What we read about Hannah next is that Hannah moves toward the feast. It's like something has happened in Hannah, and in that priest speaking to her, she has a confirmation of her faith that her prayers have been answered, enough that she's able to stop crying, pull herself together, and actually join Peninnah and all the other children as they feast together. Something has happened inside of Hannah. It's been a very, very difficult time. Peninnah has been harassing her and mocking her and prosecuting and persecuting her. "I have children and you don't." And now she has received this word through the priest Eli. And Hannah begins to break out in a song. She starts to sing. And this is the song that she sings. "My heart exults in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord. There is none beside you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who are full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. More about this song in a moment. But what you need to know is that as Hannah rejoins the feast, something has changed in her heart. Something has changed in her spirit, in her faith. She's received this word from Eli. She is going to prevail. And sometime after she returns to her hometown of Ramah, she does get pregnant. She does give birth to a son. And she remembers that day that she prayed in the temple, that she said, God, if you bless me with a child, I will return this child to you. And so a few years later, the child's about 3 years old. About 3 years later, Hannah keeps that promise. And she goes back to the same city, the city of Shiloh, back to the same temple, and she offers Samuel to the Lord to serve and live in a place where he will spend his entire life living for God. And Hannah sings this song. And she has good reasons to sing, doesn't she? Because she has now known the child that she longed for, right? She knows that far from God despising her, God never forgot her. And he knew her, and he remembered her in a very obviously significant and special way. He knew about her all along. She sings from the fullness of joy that comes from costly giving. Hannah has received the promise, has received God's answer. She did have a child, and then he was able to offer that child to God. And there's a joy that comes when we know that we have fulfilled God's plan and purpose for us, and we have obeyed him. She sings out of that kind of joy. And she sings from the assurance that God has done this. And if God did this for me, he could do anything. And I love the way that Hannah moves from the lesser to the greater. What I take away from Hannah's experience at this point is to remind myself, as I remind you, that every time that God does something for us, every time he blesses us, even no matter how small it might be, knowing that God can do this thing should remind us all that there is no thing that God cannot do. And so we move from the lesser to the greater with Hannah, and we know that he has done this for me, and if he's done this for me, he can do anything, because he's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. That's a children's song that we used to sing, Becky and I, when we were little. Maybe you did too. He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 Hannah knew this, and she knew this from experience. And she knew it out of her own life. He's got me, the little bitty babies, and me, Hannah, in his hands. In his hands. Hannah prevails. And I really like this word prevail. I looked it up. It means to be greater in strength. And in English, anyway, it means be greater in strength and influence, to overcome and to triumph. Hannah prevails for the same reason that you and I can prevail, because Hannah was with God. She was with him, and he was with her. He was with her because God was with her. Just as importantly, she is with him. She is on God's side. Yes, we know that God is on our side. Yes, we know that Jesus promised he would never leave us or forsake us, but we also need to know that I am going to be with him as well. I'm going to be on God's side. I love this translation from Romans 8:28 from Tom Wright. We know, it's a very familiar verse to many of us here. You'll recognize it, I think. We know, in fact, that God works all things together for the good of those with those, key word, with those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. It's like what Hannah is saying is this: what God has done for me is how God works in the world. The way God worked in my life is the way God works in the whole world. If you open your eyes, you can see it. And you can see Him. And you can see Him. When God wins, we win. When we are with God. So let's take a little bit of time, the rest of our time, to look at what does it mean to be with God. From Hannah's story, who walked with God, who lived with God, who experienced God in this way, what does it mean for us to be with God? One of the things it means is that we are with someone, and if I can call God a someone, allow me to do that if you will. We are with someone who can reverse whatever he finds to bring about his will and his purpose. As you read the Bible, as you read the account of God, the way God relates, how He's present in our world from cover to cover, you quickly see the patterns of God always constantly and consistently reversing what He finds, turning inside out what He finds to bring about His will and His purpose. He seems actually to delight in this kind of thing. He seems to delight to draw to Himself a reversal so that He can accomplish what He wants to accomplish. It means that God can do what He wants to do. He's not limited like you and me. And if He has to reverse the whole world to do it, He will. If He has to turn the whole world inside out, He will, to accomplish His will and His purpose. And in Hannah's song, you get examples of this. You get the strong. He says, the strong lose their strength, and the weak become strong. The full find themselves empty, and the hungry cease to be hungry. Those with many children are brokenhearted, and the childless rejoice. Life is taken from us, and the dead are raised to live again. The rich are brought low, the poor inherit a seat of honor. What it means is that God is not limited to a set of circumstances about our beginnings. Think of it. Maybe you've heard this before. You and I had no control over where we were born, to whom we were born, and when we were born. I like to think of myself as an autonomous, responsible adult who's in control of my life and in control of my destiny. But the reality is so much of who I am and who you are have to do with things that you had no control over. Where you were born, to whom you were born, and when you were born. But what you need to know more than just its impact on your choices is the way that God operates in this. Because God is not limited to where you were born and when you were born and to whom you were born. As I say this often here from this pulpit on Sundays over the last 18 years, it doesn't matter what your passport says. It doesn't matter where you were born, what country, what nation, what language you speak. When God is at work in your life, God is going to be at work in your life. And He can reverse any circumstance He wants to. He can make the poor rich. He can make the hungry full. He can take the dead and make them alive. So remember that God is not limited to your circumstances. In fact, He seems to delight in doing this very kind of thing. The person who says, God, I just don't know. I don't think I'm capable. I don't think I'm able. Can't you find somebody else? There's got to be somebody else better and more qualified than me. The most humble person is the person most likely to be chosen by Him. He moves toward the humble and the weak so that He might lift us up and exalt it. He's been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. Jesus captured this, by the way. If you're wondering, is this a Jesus thing? It certainly is. Luke chapter 6. And He lifted up, that is Jesus, His eyes on His disciples, and He said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and spurn your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day, and leap for joy. For behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to their prophets." In this way, God is going to reverse the things of the world and the things of our lives so that He might accomplish His will for you, with you. His will for you, with you. Paul spoke of this as well in 2 Corinthians. God said to Paul, he had a terrible physical ailment, and God said to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. Paul said, take this away from me. I've got this physical problem that I just really struggle with, and it's hindering me, and it's horrible. And God said, my grace is going to be sufficient for you because my power is made perfect in weakness. And Paul responds, then when I am weak, you are strong. You are strong. I remember years ago when I was a pastor for the first time. Becky and I were pastoring the first church, right? We were pretty young. We were in our late 20s. I was 28 years old when I became a senior pastor. You know, that I'm at a point now in life where, you think about who should be in spiritual leadership. I get to be in those kind of roles where you get to make those kind of evaluations. And, I'm looking at people's ages and I'm thinking, wow, that's how old I was when I became a pastor. People looked at me, I was a spiritual leader. Anyways, I don't know what they were doing. I should probably go back and say, I'm sorry, guys, about everything that happened back then. But thanks for loving me and hanging in there with me. So I probably owe them that. And we were in a situation. I'm brand new, green as grass, as they say, brand new. And I'm in this kind of a upside down situation where the two churches from my particular network, one in my town, which is I'm a pastor there, and the other in the other town, and there's some kind of friction going on between the two groups. We're actually going on in the one group, and some of the people from that group are coming over to us, because of the friction and the trouble that's going on in that group, and it's going back and forth, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to handle this, and I don't know what should I do, and so I call my mentor, my superintendent, my bishop, and he says, he said several things to me, but here, one of the things he said, Dale, he said, I know this situation. I'm familiar with where you are and where that other group is. I've been aware of it for many years, and I can tell you, he said, although to you it feels like things are going out of balance. Like, I'm like, Bob, Reverend Crabtree, Pastor Crabtree, everything's just going good, so everything's falling apart. He said, no, they're not falling apart. They're actually coming into balance. But it feels to you like it's falling apart. Dale, they're not going out of balance, they're coming into balance. His wisdom, his experience, his knowledge of the situation could bring that perspective to me, a perspective that I did not have. So, as our Father in heaven knows you're coming and you're going, He knows where you came from, He knows where you're going, He knows the life that He's living, and remember, you are with Him, right? And when our lives feel sometimes like we're going out of balance, and like, what's going on? It's your Father that says He knows more, He's seen more, He knows you, He knows where you're going. You're not going out of balance, you are coming into balance, into the will and purpose that He has for you because you are with Him. You are with Him. God knows the whole story from beginning to end, just as He explained to Job. Frank referred to this into his prayer. God is telling Job in the very end, He's telling him, you know what, I've seen everything. How much have you seen? I've seen everything. He knows all about this. Jesus tells a parable that one of my favorites because it always gets me every time, about all-day workers. He tells about a vineyard owner, a landowner who's bringing in the harvest. And he knows on this day we got to bring in the harvest. Harvest can be like that. It's been raining, the crops are growing, the rain is done, the sun is shining. We have a limited time to bring in the harvest before it spoils in the field. And so the harvest owner, the landowner, has to hire extra workers because it's all got to be done today. And he hires extra workers, if you remember this parable, and he hires extra workers at the beginning of the day and says, this is how much I'll pay you for the day, right? Well, and he said, yeah, good, we're on, you sign up for that, you sign the contract, you're on for the day. Halfway through the day, he sees that we're not going to get finished, he hires more workers. Last hour of daylight, they're not going to finish. And he hires more people to come and work in his fields. Now, that's all great, but when they go to get paid at the end of the day, and everybody walks up to the pay table, it turns out that the people who worked just the 1 hour at the end of the day are getting paid the same as the people who'd worked all day. Now, I'm looking at some of your faces and go, yeah, that's not right. Yeah, I mean, that's wrong. Oh, that's somebody ought to sue or something. We should form a union or something. This is not right. And yet Jesus makes the point, because the landowner said, "Friend, this is what we agreed to, and it's my wealth, and it's my generosity, and I'm paying you what we agreed to do. And if I want to be that generous with the person who worked for 1 hour, then I can do that. I can do that." And that's the God that we know, and that's the God that we are with. He is with us, and He is generous. Hannah and Samuel are latecomers. They've come late in the game. They've come late in the day. And yet God is going to pour out His generosity on them. And you're going to see it in the life of Samuel. Secondly, when we are with God, what's it like to be with God? Well, digging down a little deeper into Hannah's song, we discover that He lifts up the humble and He opposes the proud. And this is a consistent pattern with God. God chooses to bless and favor those who many do not see as deserving of His blessing and His favor. He draws them to Himself, and He showers on them all the blessings of the firstborn, the responsibility and inheritance. And He does this for those He draws near to Him, as He reverses things and lifts up the humble and lays down or brings down the proud. He seems, as I said, to delight in these kinds of things, bringing those of us who have been humbled, those of us who are hungry and poor, bringing us closer to Himself. Who are the proud? The proud are not willing to go or to give God His rightful place. It's the proud that always thinks, "I did this by myself. Thank you very much." The proud cannot acknowledge the contribution of others and their success. Like a Nebuchadnezzar or King Herod, you'll have to read about those guys who stood up one day and said, "Look at me and all that I have done," without anybody help. Pride is not the opposite of confidence, by the way. It's not the opposite of confidence or accomplishment. It's about the source. It's about the source. I grew up in a church, Becky and I grew up in a church where this pride was such a big deal, and humility, and we taught humility and we expected humility, but we overdid it. And so we ended up with false humility. And then some of you people may have come from a church like mine. So when the soloist came up to sing, she was obligated to say, "This is probably going to be terrible. I didn't practice. I don't know what it's going to sound like, but I'm just going to try my best. I just want to be humble about the whole thing, so I didn't practice at all. And if there's anything good in this, go ahead and just take it, because I'm surprised myself it's going to be any good." It was a false humility, right? We didn't understand this humility that is there for us to live out. It's a humility that allows God to exalt us, which is better than our pride and our own self-promotion. As C.S. Lewis said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And of course, Jesus is the best example. He humbled Himself. Philippians chapter 2. He humbled Himself. He left glory. He left the majesty of His Father's kingdom, and He came to be like us, to be with us, so that we might murder Him, and that He might offer His life a sacrifice for us. Jesus lives humility in one small but significant way. Before He left, He washed the feet of those who were closest to Him as He knelt down and washed their dirty feet and said, "Now here's your towel, and here's your basin of water. You can begin too." That was Jesus. Thirdly and lastly, when we walk with God, what we discover is this is a real partnership, not a fake partnership. You didn't just get invited along so you could go get the coffee and donuts, but sit there at the end of the table and don't talk, because all the other people at this table are important, but you're just here. No, when God brings you in, and when we are with God, it's a real partnership. Your partnership with God is meaningful. It counts. It actually counts. You count and you matter. Things in Israel had been spiraling downward for a long time, and God says, it's time for a change. I'm going to change this. I'm going to reverse this. And God's purpose was to reestablish Judah, the tribe of Judah, because God had already said, From Judah, the kings of my people will come. And from the line of those kings, the King of kings will come. And there's hardly a Judah, hardly a sniff of a Judah when Samuel is born. And God is going to reverse things. He's going to reestablish this tribe. And he's going to accomplish the line of Judah so that the Lion of Judah will come. And that's what he's doing. And he makes Hannah and Samuel his partners in this. Amazing. He makes Hannah and Samuel his partners in this. He's ready to turn things inside outside. As my daughter, not named Emily, used to say when she was 2, 3 years old, she used to say, we'd say, oh, honey, your shirt is inside out. And she would come back, she goes, and then she'd come back and she'd say, oh, my shirt is inside outside. I said, what? My shirt is inside outside. And I'm looking, oh, inside out. Okay. All right. So what God is doing is he's taking your shirt and turning it inside out. If the outside is out, he makes the outside in. If the inside's out, he makes the inside out. Whatever he needs to do to accomplish his will and his purpose with you, like bringing back Judah and the line of Judah. He will have his way, and you are his partner. You're working with him, and it's real. Your partnership, like Hannah and Samuel with God, is real. He's counting on us to work with him. Hannah is someone like this, someone to pay attention to. Here's why. We're almost over. Number one, God speaks through Hannah. We want to pay attention to Hannah as someone who works with God in a real partnership and see that God speaks through Hannah. Hannah said, the Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. What's amazing about that is that when Hannah said that, there was no king in Israel. In fact, there'd never been a king in Israel. I think Hannah is singing and praying prophetically. She's talking about a king that hasn't come yet. But she is partnered with God, and God knows that a king is coming, and he's working with and through Hannah as she sings out and proclaims this song and God's will and purpose. A king is coming. A king is coming. And Hannah and Samuel are going to be very much a part of it. As we go through this series, you're going to see how very much they are a part of this. Hannah, secondly, is like Father Abraham, except that she doesn't wait for God to ask for the son. Hannah does Abraham one better. She offers her son. I'm not putting Abraham down. Who would put Abraham down? But God said, will you offer your son? Hannah is saying, if I am shown grace by you, I will respond in grace and offer my son. I mean, Hannah's amazing, right? If you show grace to me, then I, God, will show grace to you, and I will offer you my son. Wow, that's amazing faith. That's an amazing partnership with God. We should pay attention to Hannah. Her childlessness is her test. She passes the test. She says this to God, and God honors her as his partner. She says, as I said, if you show me grace, I'll respond in grace. God says, will you come with me to see my kingdom come? And I think that's what God is saying to us today. Same invitation to partner with him, to be with him, and for God to be with us. Will you come with me to see my kingdom come? What does yes look like for you? When I was 17 years old, I started to, that was a point in my life where I started to think that I would want to be a pastor. And that's what God was leading me to do. And there's a lot going with that. But I have to tell you, as I thought about that, I grew up in a church. The Christian context was very familiar to me. Church life was very familiar to me. A pastor's role, I knew that. I sat there on a Sunday, there was my pastor. At the time, my home church was a larger church, especially in the late 70s, 1,000 people. So that might not be big today, but in 1977, it was huge, 1,000 people. And as I started to wrestle with the possibility that God was asking me to be a pastor, I know this might sound silly, but remember, I was just 17, I thought in some way that if I said yes to God, like starting next Sunday, I was going to have to be the pastor of a church of 1,000 people. So I said, no. No, I can't do that. You know, it's like, I can't be the pastor of a church with 1,000 people. I can even hardly back out of my driveway without running into something, you know. And I really wrestled with that. And in all seriousness, I wrestled because I really had a sense that God was asking me to do something so totally out. Partner with me. Yes, I'll do that, God. Do this. I can't do that, God. It's way out of my depth. And then God said to me, not audibly, but just in a way that I would understand, I'm not asking you to be the pastor of a church of 1,000 people. You're planning on enrolling at a liberal arts university. I'd like for you to go to a Bible college. That was it. That's my yes. Not go all over the world, not live in China, not pastor of a church of 1,000 people. Would you fill out the application to go to a 4-year Bible college instead of this 4-year university that you were planning on attending? That was my yes. My kingdom is coming. Will you come with me to see my kingdom come? What does your yes look like? And will you say yes? To not just have God be with you, but for you to be with the God who loves you and is calling you. Father, I pray today, Lord, many of us in this room, we love you. We walk with you. Many of us in this room have walked with you many years. We know. And perhaps today is the day that we are being stirred up and drawn to you, having enjoyed your presence with us, to remind us that we are also with you, and you, as Jesus said, are about the Father's business. And so should we. So, Father, today, on this day, whatever, for some of us, it's coming to our minds and spirits right now. I know what that yes looks like. It's fill out the application for the Bible college, you know. But it could be anything. Each one of us are so unique to you. Each one of us has our own place in your kingdom. Each one of us will respond. Like a Hannah, like a Samuel, like a Becky, like a Dale, like a David, and say yes to you. I want to be with you as you bring your kingdom. We pray this. We pray our yes in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.